Developer Relations for TBD, which is Block's newest business unit that's focused on decentralized technologies. Today, I want to talk about the web. Hook me up. All right. So the web was invented to decentralize communications. The ethos was anyone can publish any information to anyone in the world without the approval of any central entity. The web totally revolutionized the way that we interact. However, it's missing a key element, an identity layer. So applications that require user accounts, they have to collect our data in order to persist it with our content. And major powerhouses such as Facebook and Google have tried to help alleviate a lot of this by enabling us to authenticate to these third-party apps via their services. That's been very convenient, but we have very little agency over our information. What if we could own and control both our identity and our data across the web? This is possible with the Decentralized Web Platform. This platform embraces the convenience of the account models that we know from Web 2, but it also restores control back to the users, an ethos of Web 3. The harmony of these two views is what we're calling Web 5. Now, people laugh when I say Web 5. What happened to Web 4? I heard all your jokes. Save them, okay? It started out as a kind of playful, tongue-in-cheek thing, but the more we thought about this, the more we realized, this is actually fitting. So much of the discourse that I hear is Web 2 versus Web 3, or Web 3 is going to replace Web 2. You don't got to be all that drama, What if we took the best of Web 2 and the best of Web 3, put them together, and voila, Web 5. So this platform enables developers to build decentralized web applications while it abstracts away a lot of the complexity of doing so. So Web 5 is comprised of 3 core pillars, all of which are based on open standards. We have decentralized identifiers, also known as DIDs or DIDs. We have verifiable credentials, and then decentralized web nodes. And I'll walk you through each one of these in more detail. So decentralized identifiers. The identifiers that we use today are owned by some intermediary, whether that be the government or a company or an organization. For example, my email address. This is an identifier that's associated with me. I use it all across the web to authenticate and identify myself, but I don't own it. Google owns that. My Twitter handle, TechGirl1908, near and dear to my heart. This is an identifier associated with me, but Twitter owns it. And while I can manage these identifiers to a certain degree, I don't own or control them. So before we can realize truly decentralized applications, we first need decentralized identifiers that users own and control, and that will remove that dependency we have on applications to authenticate and represent us across the web. Now, decentralized identifiers are a W3C standard. They're essentially a long string of text that is comprised of 3 parts. It has the scheme, that's always going to be DID, the DID method. This ultimately resolves to a CRUD operation, so create, read, update, or delete. And then finally, we have a GUID that identifies the DID subject. By subject, I mean the person, the place, the thing that is being identified. So these identifiers are not limited to just people. Decentralized identifiers are the only part of Web 5 that is on a blockchain. And it's just this string, not anyone's personal data, because we happen to think it's pretty wild to put people's data on a blockchain. So, because they all follow this same structure, they can be represented on any blockchain or no blockchain at all. The first example here is on the Bitcoin blockchain. The second one is on Ethereum. Shout out on the merge. And then the last one is just on the web. So that's not on a blockchain at all. Now, we, TBD, my business unit, happens to believe to achieve the maximum decentralization that we should anchor this identifier on this immutable ledger. But again, that's optional. So because the ID is on the blockchain and the data is not, we use the decentralized identifiers as a URI that points to the data off-chain. Okay? That data is living in what's called a DID document. So you can think of this as a key-value pair, where the DID is the key, the document is the value, and the document will live in a decentralized storage system such as IPFS. The document is a JSON file. It contains information on how to engage with the DID subject. So it'll be things like the subject's public keys, as well as authentication and verification methods, okay? So that covers decentralized identifiers. The next pillar of the platform is verifiable credentials. Verifiable credentials are also a W3C standard, and they work hand in hand with decentralized identifiers to enable trustless interactions, meaning two parties don't need to know or trust each other in order to engage. Let me show you an example. Let's say that Alice wants to apply for a loan, and the lender needs to verify her employment. Well, Alice's employer, Acme, can issue a cryptographically signed, verifiable credential, which Alice can store in her identity wallet. Now, I want to double-click inside of that credential to show you what's there. We have the issuer as Acme. We have the subject as Alice. More specifically, we have their decentralized identifiers. So again, identifiers can be used for companies or people. And then we have the claims that the issuer is making about the subject. So they're saying her full name is Alice Smith. Her salary is $120,000. That's all the information that this lender needs. When we think about the IDs that we use today, if I want to go get a drink after this, which I probably will, I need to show the bartender my ID, right? My driver's license to prove that I'm at least 21 years old. Well, that ID has my full government name. It has my home address. That's a lot of information to give to a stranger for a drink, you know? So with verifiable credentials, what we're doing is scoping it down. What do you need to know? And that's the information I'll give you, nothing more, nothing less, and people maintain some sense of privacy here. Last but not least, this verifiable credential has been cryptographically signed by Acme. So when the lender asks Alice for proof of employment, she can present to them this verifiable credential that she has from her employer. She also cryptographically signs it. She gives it to them. They can send this through a validation system so they know that it's real. Not only that, they know that it's still valid. So these credentials, they can expire, they can be revoked. Like if she terminates her employment with this company, the credential is in her wallet, well, they would need to revoke it. So all of that is known. Now, again, this lender doesn't know or trust Alice, and they don't have to. They consider Acme a trustworthy entity. Acme has vouched for Alice, therefore extending trust to her. Okay? So that's verifiable credentials. The last pillar of Web 5 is the centralized web nodes. So today, centralized entities act as our data stores. Applications host our preferences and our content on their servers. Decentralized web nodes changes this by enabling us to decouple our data from the applications that we use. Instead, we host the data ourselves in our own personal data stores. So Blue Sky is a good example of this. It's a decentralized version of Twitter that's in the works. But instead of the app hosting your tweets and your connections, such as your followers, you host it yourself. What this means is I can take that with me. It's portable now. So if there's another decentralized social media app, I can present all of my content and all of my followings to that one. So when there's new decentralized Instagram or new decentralized TikTok or new decentralized whatever else the kids come up with, I don't have to start from zero. I can bring my following and my content with me. It's pretty cool. So decentralized web nodes can hold both public as well as private encrypted data. So in the case of decentralized Twitter, things like your tweets, your connections, you probably want to make that public. And things like your DMs, you would want to be encrypted. Why y'all laughing? Now, decentralized web nodes also do not live on a blockchain because, contrary to unpopular belief, people don't want their tweets and their DMs on a public immutable ledger, right? So we're not doing that. Instead, you can host your web nodes locally, and then you can replicate them to your different devices or cloud. Now, I'm sure some of you are thinking, Angie, nobody want to host their own web nodes. And I hear you, right? It's not the daunting task that it once was. I can host a web node on my phone. That's how powerful our phones are today, right? I can replicate that to a cloud. That way applications have easy access to it. But I'm a realist. I've been around for a minute. I do believe that convenience will prevail as always, and centralized entities will probably want to host your web nodes for you, right? There's some benefit in them having all of your public data right there. Unlike today, where I use different, cloud providers to host my data, today they can mine all of that data. In the case of Web 5 and the decentralized web nodes, because I've encrypted my private data, then they wouldn't be able to access that, okay? So decentralization is a spectrum. You can be as decentralized as you want and host your node yourself. If you don't mind trading a bit of decentralization for convenience sake, I'm sure there will be powerhouses willing to host these for you. Now, while this fundamentally changes the way we exchange data, it's not a total overhaul of the web. It works pretty much like a progressive web app, but instead we'll add the decentralized web node SDK, and that way applications are free to really go serverless because they no longer have to store our data. Double-clicking into how this all works with the decentralized web nodes, they are associated with our decentralized identifiers, and they're listed in our DID document. So this snippet here has service endpoints section, and it has the URIs to Alice's web nodes. Given that an application has the address to your web nodes, they can send an HTTP request for any data that they need. Now, this is presumably a social media app. How do I know that? Because the information they're asking for follows the social media posting schema. So all of the data within our web nodes are JSON objects that follow some semantic type. If a request comes in for a specific type of data, it finds that data. If it's public, it just automatically returns that back. And if the data is encrypted, then the web node owner would need to grant access to that data, all right? So that covers the pillars of Web 5. All of this is obviously pretty complicated, especially for, layman users. So I tell people all the time that decentralization is not a feature that most users are asking for, right? So we need to have a simple, easy-to-use interface that allows people to manage all of this while making decentralization an implementation detail. An identity wallet could help users manage their decentralized identifiers in the context in which those are used, manage their verifiable credentials so that they can present them to organizations or accept them from issuers, and then also manage that data in their web nodes and any applications that have access to that data. Now, Web 5 enables developers to build decentralized web apps on top of it. The individual components are open web standards, meaning they don't belong to any one company. My team, TBD, is implementing these standards, aggregating them together to make the decentralized web platform. This is open source. Web 5 is open source, so you're free to use this as your foundation and focus your attention on what you care about, which is your web app. So what's the benefit to decoupling our data from the apps that we use? Well, here's one of many examples. Amazon is on an acquisition spree. They're on pace to gain a comprehensive view of just about every aspect of our lives. And we've been conditioned to give a little bit of information to this app, give a little bit of information to that app. And some of this we've done out of necessity, but most has been for convenience. We like having things personally tailored to our needs and our preferences. And there's nothing wrong with that. We didn't do anything wrong. These companies, however, are taking advantage of that. They're picking up the breadcrumbs that we've left all over the web, and they're putting those puzzle pieces together to gain this view of us. With so much data, these companies are becoming gold mines, even to prosecutors. I actually don't care where you sit on a political spectrum. This sort of invasion of privacy should concern us all. And it's getting out of control. Just a couple of weeks ago, I saw a news article about MyChart. MyChart holds it's a patient portal that holds sensitive, private health information about patients. Well, they allegedly were sending that private, sensitive health information to Facebook, of all companies. Yes, the same Facebook that was in the news last week because their engineers told the courts, look, we got so much data on people, we don't know what to do with it. We don't know how to organize it. So we definitely can't comply to your little laws, okay? So quit asking us about it. That Facebook. So Web 5 prescribes that we decouple our data from these apps. We own it ourselves, but we can still enjoy the convenience and the personal customizations within these apps. But why would these companies who have made billions of dollars off of our data embrace such a model? Well, data is a liability. You don't want tech to be political? I'm so sorry. It already is. We've gotten ourselves into this predicament. But we can get out of it. Just stop collecting data. Stop collecting that data, and we won't find ourselves, or we'll at least reduce the chances of being caught up in these messy cases. So when I tell people about decoupling their data from their apps, my fellow techies kind of curl up in defeat at just the thought of it, right? The mountain is too tall to climb, the battle too big to fight. They're going against the tech giants. I don't think it's that dramatic, if I'm being honest. I don't think there'll actually be a fight. When I look at the landscape, all of the major tech companies, all of the major finance companies are trying to get into this space, right? There's benefit in them doing so. Web 5 was not some harebrained idea that some maximalists came up with in their basement. These are actually W3C standards. So it's not a far stretch to think that companies will embrace this. And data is getting expensive, y'all. In light of GDPR laws, here's just a few of some of the big fines over the last couple of years because companies have either neglected to get proper consent for the data they collect or they've had data breaches. They're not in the business of all of this. They don't want to do all of that. All right? And then if we think about the flip side of all of this, user acquisition would be much better. When we sign up for a new app today, we go with nothing. They don't know us. We don't know them. We're trying to learn each other. Versus with Web 5, when you get a new user from one of your competitors, they're coming with a rich repository of data that you can already tap into and start serving them a beautiful user experience. That's pretty valuable. Now, I want to share some examples of applications that you can come up with using Web 5. Let's take music streaming. So Alice, she has her decentralized web node, and she has a Spotify account. She's given Spotify write access to her web node. So when Alice makes a new playlist, Spotify writes that to her web node instead of writing it to their server. Now, I know if any of you are like me, once you're locked into something like this, you don't really switch providers because I don't want to recreate all my playlists and stuff all over again. Well, with the web node, since it's on her server, that's this one place where this is. Tidal, which is another music app that pays artists more, she might want to try that out. She gives Tidal read access to her web nodes, and they can see all of the stuff that Spotify has written there. And so she's just up and running. She can start playing her music on day one. That's pretty cool. Travel. Let's say Alice wanted to come to Refactor. So Alice, she needs to book her flight, her hotel, her car reservation. She has a little trip app that helps her manage all of this. Poor Alice, her flight was delayed by a lot. So Alice has to call the car rental people. Y'all know they short on cars. So she begging them, please don't give my reservation away. She got to call the hotel if it's getting too late, let them know she's still coming so they don't give her room away. All of this while she's hustling and bustling at the airport trying to get her flight together. With Web 5, if all of this was just written to her web node, she gives the airline, the car rental place, and the hotel read and write access to the trip objects in her web node. They see what's going on, and they can adjust accordingly when there's any updates to her itinerary. Medical records is a big one for me. So within the last 5 years, I've lived in 3 different states. So I have to get a new set of doctors every time I move. I see your heads nodding. You know my pain, right? So it's been a nightmare trying to get my medical records from this doctor, that doctor. You know, I have my primary care. I got a gynecologist. I got a dermatologist. You got all these different specialists. You're trying to gather all that information to send it to these different places. I asked them to fax it over. It never makes it. I can't keep up with all of this, right? So with Alice, she has her medical records right there in her web node. She can give her primary care physician, any specialist she wants, access to that data, and they have this complete view of her medical history. She doesn't have to repeat tests and stuff every time she gets a new doctor because they have no baseline. So these are just a few of the apps that can be realized once we have the web decentralized the way it was always intended to be. But I don't want to leave you all with rainbows and fairy dust, right? Y'all know me, I'm very transparent. I like to keep it real with you. So there are some problems with Web 5. For example, key management. People are notorious for forgetting their passwords, losing their keys. So what happens if someone, I want to own and control my data, but oops, I lost my private key. How do you get back in, right? What if you're locked out of your device or your identity wallet? How do we ensure people can still get access to that data? Because I don't want to lose all of my data with my medical records and my playlists and everything like that, right? We're not talking about Bitcoin. What you talking about? This is a non-crypto talk. But yes. But to his point, this is not a unique problem to Web 5. This is a problem across the space in general. So I'm hopeful that there are a lot of brilliant minds that are thinking about this, and they'll come up with a solution that's both user-friendly and secure. Data usage, this one keeps me up at night, y'all. So I own my data. I give access to an application. How can I prevent that application from making a copy of my data, storing my data on their servers, selling my data? How can I prevent that? Right now, I cannot. So we're hoping for something like a personal terms of service that'll be universally understood and complied with, so that if there's a misuse of my data, there'll be legal consequences to that. We do have precedents with GDPR, so hopefully this can be solved. And then interoperability. So all of the examples that I showed you, the social media, the music playlist, the travel, the medical records, those applications were using the same schema to read and write data. But that's not a requirement. We can't force any application to use a certain schema. And schema.org provides, these kind of universal standardized schemas that can be used across the web. So we're hoping everyone's a good citizen and goes that route, but y'all know how people are, right? So if I had, one app writing my data using one schema and I try to plug it into another app that's using a different schema, that won't work. I'm hoping that apps will naturally see the benefit to being a good citizen and playing along with the common vocabulary. Because if not, when this becomes prevalent and we are used to having portable data, we're going to get pretty upset if an app tries to lock us in and I use your music streaming service and now I can't use anybody else's. Okay, forget you, right? That's what I'm hoping is going to happen. So that's Web 5 in a nutshell, the good and the bad. I'm very excited about this technology, y'all. It's open source, like I said. You can find more information on tbd.website. If you want to check it out, like I said, it's open source. You can get our GitHub links, check out the code, play around with it. If you want to contribute, you can do that as well. If you're sitting there, you already have the solution to the problems I mentioned. Let's go. There's links to our Discord on there. Join the community. Happy to discuss that. If you want to work on decentralized technologies full time, there's job openings on our site. And if you're a company, you're trying to solve some of these same challenges, or you need to use some of these components, We'd love to collaborate. All right? Thank you all so much for your time.